Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and today we're visiting with David W. Welday, the third co-author of Shaping Your Family Story, How Imperfect Parents Create Hope and Promise for Their Children. David, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
David loves being a dad, even more than playing guitar, snow skiing, golf, and drooling over exotic cars. By day, he's a marketing strategist and coach, working with a wide range of nonprofit and corporate clients. He still adores his wife, Amy, and is the proud father of 3 sons and a growing group of grandchildren. So, David, you have a publishing entity, you have a consulting entity, a marketing entity. You're quite the entrepreneur, but yet you still have time for parenting and involved with the family.
Absolutely. In fact, I think the thing that gives me the greatest joy, the thing I'm most excited about in terms of identity, is being a dad. I love being a dad. And even though my sons are grown now, I still revel in fathering and parenting and pouring into the next generation.
Did you have an active dad? Did you grow up in a family that was engaging, or did some of this grow out of what you began to see was missing pieces in your upbringing that you didn't want to repeat? I know a lot of us say, I don't want to sound like my father. I don't want to be like my dad. But we find ourselves at that crossroads where we sound just like what we stated we didn't want to do.
You know, it's interesting. Many people discover their identity through crisis, through things that went wrong, and therefore they go in another direction. I had the rare privilege of being raised in a healthy household. My parents are still together. They love each other, and I still have a great relationship with both my mom and my dad, and celebrate that. And I realize that's a minority. That most people don't have that. So I'm grateful and I'm blessed for that. How I sort of fell into this whole passion for generational ministry and parenting was interesting. I was a marketing director and was responsible for growing the circulation of several publications, and I was tapped by my employer to start a curriculum development company. And I thought, okay, well, if our customers are going to be Sunday school teachers and children's ministry workers, then maybe I better be one too. So at the age of, I think it was early 40s, I began teaching Sunday school, and just so that I could start to identify with, who would be our clients. And in the process, I discovered, oh my gosh, this is why God made me wild and crazy. Why I'm basically a goofball is I just get kids. I work well with kids. And I began to discover that God literally just ripping open my heart and giving me his passion for generations. And so I really stepped into this kind of middle life, just getting a passion for generational ministry and for young adults and kids. And as I did that, then I began to realize, you know what, as powerful and important as a youth pastor or a children's minister is, the real mantle of responsibility for seeing kids discover their identity and purpose is with the parents. And so that's really what led me into starting a nonprofit parenting ministry called Next Generation Institute.
Now, were you raised in the church? Were your family people of faith? Was faith a component part of your upbringing?
Yes, but it was an evolving thing. My dad worked his whole career for Chevrolet Motor Division, and they transferred their executives frequently. So whenever people ask, where are you from, I never quite know how to answer that, because the truth is I don't have a hometown. We seemed like we moved every couple of years. So I was raised largely in the Midwest, and my parents, like a lot of suburban families, were churchgoers. So whenever we moved to a new town, we'd find a church. It might be a Methodist church or a Presbyterian church or a Baptist church, but we'd find a church to go to. And so I was raised with what I would call Christian values, and I assumed I was a good person and a believer because I went to church. But as a teenager, we just moved to, I think, Grand Blanc, Michigan, which is outside of Flint. And my parents put me on a bus to a young life camp out in Colorado. And there I was confronted with the gospel in a way that I'd really never considered before. It's kind of like if you gave me your resume, I might read your resume and say, yeah, I believe you can do all of those things, but that's not the same thing as hiring you. And so I recognized that just knowing who Jesus was and that God loved me wasn't enough. I really needed to do something about that knowledge. I needed to respond to the gospel. So I became a Christ follower, a Christian, when I was about a teenager, about 14. And right around that same time, my mom really got turned on to the Lord. And so our whole family went through a metamorphosis in my teen years where we went from being typical churchgoers, yeah, I believe in God, to pretty on fire, zealous people, and I've never looked back. So since my teen years, I've largely been passionately pursuing God's call on my life as opposed to whatever I want to do.
You know, it's interesting that your coming to faith journey is similar to many stories that I hear, that in a different environment outside of home and the traditions of home and family, but away where you're focused, and these Campus Crusade or some of these organizations that have these camps and have these programs, it's good to get the teens involved where they can actually get with the peer group, where they can hear and encourage each other as well as having the influence of the parents. So your parents picked an influence for you, which was an active on their part. They sent you to a specific place. They could have sent you to any kind of camp, anywhere, but they chose that, and that became a key influence, a key starting point, kind of an ignition point for you to hear clearly from the Lord.
You know, it's interesting because, and I see this in church a lot, and I'm still actively involved in kids ministry and working with young people, but we think it's enough to make sure that kids know all the right answers. But knowing about God and experiencing Him personally are two very different things. And I think that many families, understandably, are kind of wringing their hands with angst and fear and are concerned that even though they took their kids to church and raised them, quote, in the church, when they go off to college or go off on their own, so many of them sort of have a crisis of faith or turn away from it. And what can I do to prevent that? Well, I think one of the markers that helps keep that from happening is that you don't are not content to just let your kids know about God, but you give them opportunities to experience God, to encounter God for themselves, so that they don't have a head knowledge that, yes, God did that, but they have an experience that, oh, God is doing that or has done that for me. So it becomes life for them.
That makes complete sense.
Yeah, I think you can tell somebody all about the 5 steps of prayer, but if you've prayed for somebody and seen God move, that'll hold you a whole lot more than just having the intellectual understanding that this is how it works. So
it's a difference between an encounter and an observation.
Yeah.
You know, a participant and an onlooker. It's,
right.
Being a believer is full contact. It's
Yeah.
not a spectator sport. And we find that many people are spectators, that you ask them about their testimony and they don't have any real answer to 1 Peter, to have a ready answer for the hope that's in them. They haven't crafted a way to engage other people. So the great commission was to go make disciples of men, to share the good news. And so we find that a lot of people are reluctant to do that because they don't have a clear identity. And this plays right into what you're crafting here is an identity. Where do you get your identity from? You know, in your life, what were the key influences in your life that helped shape your identity?
Well, I would say number one was my parents, because they didn't do it perfectly, and whether it was blind luck or whatever grace, but I grew up with the gift of knowing that I was loved. I don't know exactly why or how I did, but somehow my parents were able to instill in me a sense that I had worth and I had value. And that is, in fact, such a great gift, because I see so many adults today, talented, gifted, beautiful, wonderful people who don't see themselves the way God sees them. They see themselves as wounded or damaged or broken, and God sees them as precious and beautiful and full of potential. And so one of the great gifts I think we can give our children is to give them a sense of identity that's not rooted in their performance, that's not rooted in how good a grade you get or how well you perform on the field, but in your value and your worth, which doesn't come from what you do. It comes from whose you are, who made you. And that's an incredible aspect that I hope that parents find creative ways to impart to their kids.
It's interesting that you talk about that. We have so many distractions, especially with technology today. Mm-hmm. When I was growing up in the 50s, there was no technology. Now, we weren't a family that took vacations together. Mm-hmm. So the only vacation that I can remember was seeing the back of my dad's head. We took a car ride from Pittsburgh to D.C. and Virginia, but that was the technology, was talking to the back of my dad's head, sitting in the back seat.
Except for the times that he had to turn around and say, "Do I have to stop this car?"
Right. There you go. There you go.
I heard that a lot.
And so did I. I had two sisters. And now, do you have any brothers and sisters?
I do. I have one of each. I'm the oldest of three, so I have a brother and a sister, and I can remember the family trips and smacking the other one, and then seeing who gets blamed for what, and oh yeah.
That's family dynamics.
Yep.
That's clear boundaries of what is good and wholesome and what is across the line.
Right.
And you actually address some of these principles in your book. Now, you co-wrote this book with Dr. Jim Cofield, a professor of counseling and clinical director at Reformed Theological Seminary in Orlando. What was it like to collaborate with somebody on a project like this?
Well, it was a blast. How that came about is I had recently left the company that I'd been working for some time, and kind of launched out on my own, started my own publishing and marketing company. And I really felt like God gave me a promise that He would not only take care of my family, but He would use me to do something that would be significant, to have an impact on others, that was not based upon my expertise on what I knew to do. And initially, while that thrilled me, I frankly had no idea what that was going to be. And there came a moment, and I won't bore you with the details, but when that light bulb went on, and I realized that God was really poking me to envision moms and dads, to envision parents for God's heart for parenting, and how incredibly important that is. And so, and then shortly thereafter, I really felt like the Lord downloaded into me these 5 core principles that are in the book of reflecting, directing, correcting, protecting, and connecting. And so I wrote the book, and then once I was finished, I felt, okay, now I can publish it and move on. And I really just had this reservation that said, nope, you don't have enough street cred to do this on your own. I want you to partner with somebody that has more professional training and experience in family practice and counseling and parenting, because my claim to fame or my expertise is I'm a dad. And so through a series of circumstances, I was introduced to Dr. Cofield and said, Jim, how would you like to write a book or co-author a book with me? I've kind of already written it, but I don't have all of this clinical expertise that you have. Would you be willing to add that to the book? And he graciously said yes. And so I thought he was going to take my material and just go through and add a few illustrations or stories. But in the process, we became friends, and we really collaborated much more extensively. And so the book is really this wonderful blend of sort of whatever insights I felt I had and experiences I had with Jim's rich history and his own background of also having a special needs child and some other things. So it was really a nice blend of us working together, and you find his stories, his illustrations, his insights blended with mine in ways that hopefully the reader doesn't have to wonder, was that Jim or was that Dave? It's just there.
Well, and you did a very good job of that. You actually addressed that in your kind of note from the authors, saying that, you know, we're both speaking here, one speaking here, one speaking there. We're adding to, this was a dialogue, and this is the kind of the summary of the dialogue that you two crafted over a period of, what, 2 years?
Oh, easily, yeah.
So, you know, here you have a blend of somebody that works at a seminary, teaches at a seminary, so strong man of faith, foundational faith, biblical worldview, in his counseling, it's biblical counseling. And when you blend that with your practical experience plus your journey with the Lord and the experience you had with youth, you get this blend of real life and then how the right foundation laid early enough will build a lasting legacy, a lasting story.
Plus, you get the benefit of twice as many mess-ups, because you not only get to learn from all of my mess-ups, but you get to hear about Jim's as well, because it really is a journey of course correction. You know, I think I share in the book that a plane, if you're flying from Orlando to Dallas, spends most of its time off course. As it's journeying, it's the GPS is constantly making micro corrections so that you land on time and start off on time, and I find it's that way with parenting. We're always sometimes we're off over in the ditch, sometimes we're way off course, but we're always making course corrections, and we can learn from and even celebrate sort of the mistakes, and the mistakes, that's kind of one of those core principles, do not disqualify you. If you're in fact, I want to make sure that people understand this is not a book written by people who've done it all right and are trying to tell you how to do it all right. This is written by people who have been on the same flawed journey you're on. I just want to be your cheerleader and give you some tips, some guidance along the way, knowing that you have and will continue to mess up, and that's okay, because God is in this incredible redeeming work. It doesn't matter. Listen, if your GPS can figure out a way to course correct and get you back on your journey, how much more can God take, no matter what you've done right or wrong, and still weave that into a tapestry that helps your son or daughter become this incredible person that they were intended to be?
You know, you make an incredibly strong point for course correction. Dr. John Trent, who's a well-known psychologist and author, wrote a book called Heart Shift, H-E-A-R-T, Shift. And he talked about that if we set our course and we're just 2 degrees off when we're along that journey, had they been 2 degrees off without any course correction on the moon rocket launch, they would have missed the moon by 93,000 miles. Just being 2 degrees off in trajectory without course correction. And so course correction is a given. You can't plot it out when you find out you're going to have a child and say, okay, this is how we're going to do this, and be so committed to the how that you don't have the influences of realizing some of the foundational truths that you lay out in your book, that this child's not an accident and you're not an accidental parent, that there is a master's plan at work and you have a part to play in that.
Absolutely. And I think that can breathe hope and encouragement into a parent, because again, as you point out, we all feel overwhelmed, we all feel discouraged, and it's easy to think, okay, so maybe you have that sort of planned pregnancy, it all worked just the way you wanted, but there are a lot of people that come into this world through unplanned, unprepared, unanticipated circumstances. But because I believe God is sovereign and God creates life, and every life is precious and holy to Him, so that it doesn't matter to me how fortunate or unfortunate the circumstances were that resulted in you becoming a parent, or how functional or dysfunctional your own parenting was. The reality is, God saw fit to put that son, that daughter, that child into your care. So I want to just put my arms around a parent and say, you can do this. Not because you're perfect, not because you have it all together, but because you know a God who is and who will equip you and enable you to be the parent you can be. Just having that hope helps you hang in there sometimes.
Well, I think that message is clearly woven into the fabric of the book, that this is to be an encourager and an uplifter, not a how-to and here's the right way and here's the wrong way. So I think you do a very balanced job in that. Now, is this book, which is entitled Shaping Your Family Story, is this about legacy or vision or both?
Legacy and vision and purpose and promise. All of those things woven together, because I believe your child, your son, your daughter was divinely inspired by God, thought up by God, and was created to live out an incredible family story. But yet, when we come into this world, we have no real concept of that. And so part of the role of the parent is to be that director. You don't create their families, you don't create that story, but you can help shape it. And so part of the good news or the message of this book is that it's not up to you to create their story, because that story was already written, but you can really help your child begin to discover it, and in that discovery begin to live into it, both on an individual level for their lives, but on a corporate level for your family, so that the individuals all are living out an incredible story, and that their family, the Welday family, represents a story, and that story has influence and impact beyond just my life, my wife's life, my kids, but it will go from generation to generation. So that's where the legacy part plays into it. So there is legacy, which is ongoing, as well as this incredible sense of purpose and identity and value. It all is impacted as we discover that family's story.
We've been talking with David W. Welday III, co-author with Dr. James Cofield of the book Shaping Your Family Story, How Imperfect Parents Create Hope and Promise for Their Children. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to dig into the contents of this book with David Welday. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource, that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're visiting with David W. Welday III, co-author of the book Shaping Your Family Story, How Imperfect Parents Create Hope and Promise for Their Children. David, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much. I appreciate being here.
David, your title is Shaping Your Family Story. Why is it important for a family to have a story?
Let me back up just a little bit. It's interesting, when I first wrote the book, I was going to call it Winning Parent, because I'm a boomer and I'm thinking, well, who doesn't want to win? So all of our illustrations were kind of sports illustrations. And when we started sharing and teaching the material, particularly with millennials, we found that they didn't connect with that whole concept of winning at all. It felt a little too judgmental, and that's the last thing I wanted to do. So we almost felt stuck. And so we thought, well, what are we going to call this? Because the truths, the principles, the insights are true regardless of how you title it. And being in the publishing business, I'm very aware of the importance of titling. And I don't even remember how we came up with it. But when we stumbled onto this concept of your family story, people just lit up. They resonated with that. And I thought, well, how cool is this? Because actually what I do for a living is help people share their stories. And story is sort of it's the communication vehicle of a culture. You can go to church and I might not remember the 4 points that my pastor shared, but I'll remember the story that he tells. And so stories connect us. And so it was so life-giving to me when I realized that, okay, we can share parenting truths, parenting principles within the concept of these are not do's and don'ts, but how can you help your sons and daughters discover and step into the story of their life, what their life story is supposed to be. And frankly, as a parent, how well are you living into your divine destiny, your story? And so this whole concept of a family story seems to connect with people, because it wasn't the 7 principles that you have to do to be the perfect parent. It was, no, this is an unfolding story. It's a journey. It's a process. And so how can we help you discover that and shape that? So the story metaphor, I think, really holds up and seems to work.
So who benefits from having a family story?
Everybody. Because our life is a story. So the question is, and you're going to live a story whether you intend it or not. So I guess the question is how authentic is your story? How closely does your story that you're living line up with what was intended for your life, what it could be? How much joy are you experiencing in your story? And how is your story positively impacting others? So the truth of the matter is, every one of us is living a story. My question is are you living the best story? Are you living the story that's possible for your life? And are you feeling like you got to make it up, or are you discovering that ideal story that I believe God prepared for you? So there's just a lot of ways to go with it, and I think it actually frees up parents to help children begin to discover, again, what's possible for them, and have a proactive role in that.
You know, you make a point in the book that we grow up in a culture where people say you can be anything you want to be, but that's not really true.
For years, most people got their general parenting wisdom from just paying attention to the culture. Not a lot of people, there's no manual. When you take that first baby home out of the hospital, they don't give you a parenting manual. There isn't a good one out there that I'm aware of, and so we're mostly left to discover it by talking to other people. So most of us adopt our parenting skills by just listening to the voices in the culture. Well, for decades, at least here in the United States, the general cultural wisdom on parenting largely aligned with Judeo-Christian values. So you could say that cultural parenting wisdom was not that far afield from biblical parenting wisdom. But as we have slowly shifted away from traditional values and become a post-Christian society, the conventional wisdom really is now almost going in a polar opposite direction. So, for example, the Bible would teach that all the days ordained for you were written in God's book before one of them came to be, and that we're called to train up our children in the way they are called by God to go. So biblical wisdom says that there is a story, there is a destiny, there is a plan, there is a path for your son or daughter to inherit, to follow, that will lead them to that life of purpose, significance, and joy that you want them to have. And yet the culture, instead of saying, partner with God to discover that way and help them identify that, the culture is saying, I'm not going to put my values on my kids. I'm going to let them discover that for themselves. Or, you know what, you can be anything you want to be. Sounds good. It's just not true. So, for example, I was intentional in not raising my sons to be anything they want them to be. I'm raising them to discover and live into and be the very thing that God created them to be, because that's where they're going to find the greatest sense of purpose and destiny and success and fulfillment and joy in doing that. And so it's really a different model. The culture is saying, let them figure it out for themselves, which means every generation is destined to repeat the same mistakes. Our book says one of those core values, there are 5 that we put in the book, is recognizing that there is a way, asking God to show you what is that way? And so you can be intentional in parenting your kids in that way. Can I give you an example?
Sure.
Each of my sons, as I was raising them, I felt like God revealed or shared with me some nugget, some measure of truth. So, for example, my oldest son, I felt like probably when he was 8 years old, the Lord showed me that I've called him to be a communicator. Now, that doesn't tell me anything about what he's going to do for a living, but it tells me something about God's call or God's purpose on his life. So it was actually helpful to me as a dad, so I could, for example, I could talk to my son about, okay, when you greet somebody, David, look them in the eye when you shake their hands. And I would talk to them about creating trust by how he communicates. Or we'd watch a television show together. I'd say, okay, David, if I hadn't seen that show, tell me what that show was about. Because I was coaching him on how to be able to articulate the beginning, the middle, and the end to communicate. Well, and my son wasn't naturally an extrovert, so it wasn't like I saw, oh, he's going to be in sports broadcasting, he's going to be a communicator. I didn't have any outward manifestation, but I knew that I knew what God had told me about his life. Well, he's now in advertising, and he's a gifted writer and a gifted communicator. So I'm watching him, both in practical ways and in spiritual ways, live into his call, his destiny. But along the way, I was able to prepare him for that, speak those things over his life, pour into him with intentionality. I was helping to shape his story without telling him, well, I was a plumber, so you're going to be a plumber. So it isn't about telling them what they're going to do for a living, but it is helping them embrace and discover their purpose, their identity, their story. And God has given me something unique and different about each of my sons. So even, for example, my youngest son, when he like so many others later in high school, when he went off to college, he wasn't denying his faith, but he was not living in any way. He was kind of doing La Vida Loca thing and going off the rails. But I knew what God had told me about Jason's life when he was young, that he had called him to be a proclaimer. And so all those seasons where he was not living into that aspect of his story at all, I was able to hold on to. I had hope, I had encouragement, because I know what God had said. And now, at 26 years old, he's a children's pastor. And he is dedicating children and proclaiming the gospel and baptizing young adults. And I just sit back, Amy and I, my wife and I, we just smile because we see, God, you're so good. I watched God fulfill the nuggets that he gave us as we were raising them. And so if I could encourage your viewers to do anything, it's be bold to ask God to show me a measure of the way in which you've called my son or daughter to go. Give me some ideas on what is their story so that I can be proactive in parenting in that story.
You give the components of what makes a great story, and you correlate that to the segments within your story. But there's a particular role that's in this that you found your identity in as a parent. So walk us through the 5 components of a good story.
Great. So the 5 pillars of parenting that we talk about in the book are reflecting, directing, correcting, protecting, and connecting. And as it turns out, there are 5 core elements of every great story. I don't care whether it's Transformers or When Harry Met Sally or whatever it is, but every story has these 5 core elements, which is plot, character, setting, theme, and conflict. And so, as it turns out, those 5 core elements of a great story lined up really nicely with these 5 parenting pillars that I felt like the Lord had given me of reflecting, directing, correcting, protecting, and connecting. And so you, as a mom or a dad, natural parent, step parent, as a caregiver, your role is really as a director. You're not writing the story, but you can help your children begin to discover that story. And so you do have a great role in helping to shape the outcome. So it's that fine balance, as you can't mandate it, but you can help shape it. And even now, my kids are grown, ranging from 26 to 32, and I'm still actively involved in shaping. And you talked about legacy earlier. Now I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old grandchild, and so the shaping is still happening, and I still am seeing ways that God is using me to speak life and truth and encouragement and direction, even in the next generation. So it doesn't, when they graduate and get a job or get married or go off on their own, you're still the parent, and most older parents know that, you know.
Although I see a trend for parents to want to be a friend with their child as opposed to really stepping into the role of parent.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the director of a movie is most often not cast in the movie. He's the director.
Right. Mm-hmm.
He's the authority. And so he's giving direction. He's not ordering, he's directing. I think there's a difference. He's not a
Mm-hmm.
commander, he's a director.
Yeah, if you will be the parent when that's what your child really needs, is a parent, not a friend, then you will find that as they become adults, they can be your friends for life. So, for example, the relationship I have with my sons now, I honor them as peers. They're friends, but they're friends now for the rest of their lives, because in the years, the seasons when they needed me to be a parent, they needed that structure, they needed that guidance. I focused on being that. I remember when one of my sons was going to prom, and he was relating the story of a friend of his whose parent was going to basically let their daughter spend the night at the hotel with all of their friends, and the parent in question was thinking that they were being a cool parent, a relatable parent. And the way my son interpreted that was, they obviously don't love their daughter like they think, because if they did, love, the higher value of love was in providing structure, providing boundaries. That was, even for my teenage son, could see objectively that love was much more reflected in what you can't do than what you can do. Love was reflected by providing those guardrails, those boundaries. You can't play any sport, any game, without having rules and boundaries. That's part of it. And so for you to be successful in life, you have to be a disciplined person. And the only way you will ever learn to be disciplined is by being disciplined. So discipline, providing boundaries, being willing to say no, is an incredible act of love. And you rob your child of some precious and needed things if you're more concerned about being their friend, or frankly, I see a lot of parents who are more afraid of their kids, and we're just not called to parent by fear.
You know, we've abdicated the role of parenting somewhat to the youth pastor or the public school system.
Mm-hmm.
They spend more time with their teachers at school than they do with their parents.
Mm-hmm.
So the greater influence seems to be coming from education. And we know the agenda of that, and that is a secular, humanist, liberal worldview that says it's all about me and my self-identification, and the message is in conflict with the message that a parent would be giving their child. How do you reconcile that?
I was getting ready to do open a seminar we were doing for Christian education directors, children's pastors, and I was really wanting to share something meaningful other than just sort of the generic welcome. And I remember sitting in the hotel room, maybe it was the green room, and God gave me a powerful picture that has stayed with me, that has influenced my life. And it was a picture of a woman who was in labor. She was in the birthing room getting ready to deliver. And in the room there was a midwife. And the midwife was wiping the sweat off the woman's brow and whispering words of encouragement to her. And when it came time to deliver the child, the midwife got down at the other end and literally helped to deliver that baby into this world. And I felt like the Lord said this, that in the same way that that child was very much alive when he was inside his mother's womb, he had not yet been birthed into the world. So too, there's a generation of young people among us who are very much alive. They're walking around, they're living, but they've not yet been birthed into the very purposes for which I created them. Some of them are 2, some of them are 12, some of them are 20. Now, a children's pastor, a coach, a youth leader, they have that midwife role, which is an incredibly important role, because the truth of the matter is, without a midwife, some children will die. So being a coach, a pastor is incredibly, but it's always a secondary role, because the ultimate responsibility for seeing that child birthed into the world and seeing your sons or daughter birthed into their purposes, into their story, is with mom and with dad. And so that's the tension. So being moms and dads need to lean into and lean on teachers and coaches to help, but it's always a secondary role, and it can never replace that mantle of responsibility that's primarily theirs to help see their children birthed into their purpose and destiny and the shaping of that story.
You talk about consistency in several different areas. When you have an intentional plan to write this story, you find that you can become disciplined or discipled into crafting a vision, crafting a legacy that allows you to create those goalposts, those boundaries, those rules, and consistently apply them. Why is consistency important in expectations, consequences? Why is consistency really of great import to you?
It's how we learn. Jim shares a story in the book that a child literally learns to walk because of the consistency of gravity. Gravity is always there, and it always has the same result. And so if sometimes gravity was there and sometimes it wasn't, if sometimes it was heavier than others, we could not learn to do something as basic as walking. It's the walking is there because I'm consistently learning that whenever if I get too far to this side, I fall over. If I get too far to this side, I fall over. And so it is with parenting, that to the best of our ability, if we can provide some consistency in terms of consistently loving them, consistently providing these boundaries, consistently living out these truths, consistently speaking this life, this truth into my son or my daughter, that level of consistency provides a framework from which they can feel safe and they can learn better, because we all have this need to be safe. Well, if I don't know if one day dad's going to come home and he's going to be pleased with me and the next minute he's going to blow his top at me, that breeds a lack of trust, a lack of safety, and so I'm going to stop living into my highest and best, and I'm going to go into protection mode. And so to the extent that we can create consistency, whether it's how we consistently discipline our children or how we consistently love our children, it's such an incredible thing, and it's probably one of the hardest things to do. I can remember my dad could come home from work, and if the stripes on my bedspread weren't straight and my bed wasn't made, it didn't matter where I was called in to fix that. And that's hard for me, because for me, I don't want to come home and have to deal with that. I just say, fine, the bed's not made. And I never realized until I became a parent how much work it took for my dad to be consistent in that my bed was always to be made that way. And so consistency is hard. It takes work. Don't let anybody who is a parent, you realize it is tough. But it does create that framework and that environment where values can exist and where trust can be built and security can be embraced. We talked earlier about being raised with a sense of security. Right. I don't doubt that I'm loved because there was a consistency there.
Well, that's extremely important. Now, in your chapter 5, you talk about building freedom to choose well. You talk about don't do as I do as I say, that mentality that I think I was raised in. Do kids really watch their parents?
Oh my gosh. The first of those 5 pillars is reflecting. And the reflecting pillar is basically saying you need to be the kind of dad, you need to be the kind of man you hope your sons become, or you need to be the kind of woman that you hope your daughters become. And that's not an easy word to hear, but at the end of the day, who you are as a person will speak so much louder than any rule or anything that you ever say. And so developing consistency in who you are as a person is so important. I want my kids to not remember what I told. Well, actually, I lie. I would love my kids to remember everything I told them. But I know what they're going to remember is who I am and how I acted when nobody was looking, and how I responded when bad things happened, and how quickly I asked for forgiveness when I lost my cool, which happens. So who you are speaks so much louder than what you say. I remember hearing a young woman who was a speaker at one of our conferences make this statement that profoundly impacted me. She said, "Until you can say, 'Follow me,' you've got nothing to say." And so I need to, so if I've got some habits, if I've got some things that need to be worked on, I need to work on them not just for me, I need to work on them for my kids. So I can say, well, I don't care if I speed, I don't care if I'm a bad driver, but when your kids get their license, they'll be the first one to point out how many times you're speeding, and so you've got to be that man or that woman that you want your kids to become. Right. And you're on that journey too. It really is. We're doing this together.
Well, you close the book out with a very important chapter, connecting with the divine, because without that relationship, this is difficult to see the purpose that you were able to see in your sons, to be able to hear from the Lord clearly what their destiny was, and to be able to direct them in the way that they should go, to create a framework for them that was safe and secure, but it also was a reflection of the Father's love. And that is a deep part of your message, is to be a reflection of the Father's love and God's purpose for your children's life. We've been talking with David W. Welday III, co-author of the book Shaping Your Family Story, How Imperfect Parents Create Hope and Promise for Their Children. It is a great read. It causes you to reflect. It also gives you a new sense of encouragement, hope that you can do this, you're not alone, and that parents all over the world are still working through this parenting paradigm. But this is a tool that you can use to set up a framework for yourself and for your children that are going to make you more engaging, more involved with your child's life in the ways that you want to be, not reactionary, but proactive in what you do with them. David Welday, thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth.
It's my honor and pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth. We'll be right back.